Hi, everyone. So, unfortunately, our class today was canceled due to the power outage at the Chaffee Rancho campus. So, I'm recording this video just to discuss some of the things I hoped to discuss in class today, and then to talk about what we've got going on for the next week. So, let's take a quick look at week 4, which was last week. So you had a reading. You were supposed to read A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor, and then a couple poems by Langston Hughes. I had decided not to, originally on the syllabus, I was planning for us to read another short story called The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster, but I just felt like I was giving you too much, and I wanted to slow down a little bit and incorporate one of these literary essays discussing Flannery O'Connor and this story in particular, and have you do the reading response instead. So I cut that out, cut that other story out. So you did not need to read that. And also, actually, if we go back to week 3, you had some readings about literary criticism. And so then I thought it would be a good idea to introduce you to some of that literary criticism here with these couple essays that you could have chosen to read about Flannery O'Connor's work and short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find. Okay. So you didn't need to submit anything for this particular assignment, but you could have submitted annotations or notes for extra credit points. But you do need to read one of those in order to fully complete the reading response. So there are some of you that have already submitted this. There are several questions that I'm asking you to think through and answer. And I'm really not looking for the right answer so much as I'm looking to see that you have thought through these questions and done your best to wrestle with them. I'm going to be talking about A Good Man is Hard to Find in this video, and you're welcome to use what I discuss about Flannery's work to complete the reading response, or you could even go back and revise. If you've already submitted, you could revise and resubmit if you would like to. So that is also an option. I will probably extend the due date for this a few days just because of the campus closure. And I also know, I'm sure some of you are affected by the fires. There's been lots of evacuations and just, the air quality and all of the things. So don't stress about that. I'm also going to be moving the commonplace book check to next week. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't need to submit anything. For the commonplace book, you need to have some dedicated book or notebook like this, or a composition book or a spiral notebook, whatever you have lying around for your commonplace quotes. So just as an example, this is what mine looks like. Oh, sorry, it's all blurry. So what mine looks like inside. I actually just wrote a quote today. My daughter and I just finished reading The Secret Garden. And at the very last chapter, there was a quote that I really loved. So I added it to my commonplace book. So yeah, your commonplace book is essentially just writing down quotes from things that you read that stand out to you, things that you're like, wow, I really love the way that this author said that, or that impacted you some way, or maybe shocked you, or made you think about something in a different way. Maybe it was even something you didn't understand, but you just liked the way it sounded. It can be really any quote that stands out to you for any reason. And I also want you to think about this commonplace book as kind of like your treasure trove of quotes that you can use for writing assignments. So, for example, if you're reading A Good Man is Hard to Find and there was a particular passage that stood out to you, probably for bad reasons other than good. I mean, this is a pretty difficult story in many ways. But as you're reading, and if you know you've got a writing assignment coming up for something, especially when we get into the novel that we're going to be reading for next week, write down those quotes, right? The things that stand out to you, because then you could very easily go back to your commonplace book and say, oh, look, there's a quote. I'm going to use that in my essay, or I'm going to use that in my reading response, or whatever it might be. So if you do have just like a basic spiral notebook and you want to use it also for reading notes, like your annotations or notes for this class, I would recommend that you separate it into two. So keep one half for just your commonplace quotes, and then the other half for like your reading notes and questions and other thoughts that you have. Okay. So this just gives you a little bit more information. So for next week, I am looking to see at least a few quotes from things that we've read up until this point. I hope that you have something from some of the short stories that we've read. It could be from Cinderella, from The Necklace, from A Good Man Is Hard to Find, um, and or it could also be from the book that we're reading. Just a second. For next week, which is this one. Let's see. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. So you're going to be reading the first 6 chapters of this book for next week. Um, let's go ahead and move to this week, week 5. So let's see, that is a total of about 50 pages or so. Um, It's kind of sounds like a lot, but it's really not that much. And if you break it up, like even if you were to read just 10 pages a day, um, that is doable, right? And it would take you 5 days to do that. So do not wait until Sunday night next week to start reading. I hope you all have the book, and please start reading today if you haven't already. Okay. So this weekly page will be changed slightly. I'm gonna change what it says here for doing in class on Monday. The commonplace book will be changed. The attendance will be deleted. Okay. So for Friday, you have another reading from the module. I think this is from module 10 on the English composition too. Yes, so it's about reading poetry, introduction to reading poetry for articles here. Please annotate or take notes and upload your annotations or notes here. Then you're going to be reading this poem called The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats. And this poem is important because the beginning pages, the first page actually that has any text on it in this book, Things Fall Apart, is an excerpt from this poem. So I'd like for you to have the background of this poem kind of hanging out in your mind before you start reading this book. And then it will also just put into context this verse that we find at the beginning of the book. So, yes. So those 2 assignments, the introduction to reading articles and then the poem itself, are due Friday. And then Monday, as I already mentioned, are the first 6 chapters of our first novel, this book here. I would also like for you to read a little bit about the author. And just, I think it's always helpful to have a little bit of background information about an author to see, when they were living and what their life was like and where they were coming from, and just to kind of help inform your reading. Okay. So I think that's all for now. I will also be updating the week 6 page, and that will be published shortly as well. So let's talk about the story. A good man is hard to find. Okay, so first of all, let's take a look at Flannery O'Connor's Wikipedia page and see a little bit about her. So she was born in 1925 and died at a fairly young age. She was only 39 when she died. She died in 1964. So she was an American novelist, short story writer, and essayist. She wrote 2 novels and 31 short stories, as well as a number of reviews and commentaries. She also wrote a book of essays called The Habit of Being, and there's also a published book of her letters as well as her prayer journal. So there are several published works of hers. So she was born in Georgia, Savannah, Georgia. And so she was a Southern writer, and her writing is typically classified as this Southern Gothic style. She relies heavily on regional settings. Most of her stories are set in the South. Um, grotesque characters, a lot of them are um, unsavory people. And all of her stories are violent. In her writing, um, she, well, actually, we'll get into this. I'm not going to read from here, but she was Catholic, so her writing is definitely a reflection of her faith, and we'll be talking a little bit about that. Um, Regardless of whether or not you yourself are religious, it's just important to understand where a writer is coming from. Again, knowing these things about her helps to inform us about her work and how we should read her work. So a lot of her stories then are based on questions of morality and ethics, and she's really challenging a lot of elements of faith in her stories. So something else that you should know about her is that she was diagnosed with lupus. Her father actually was diagnosed with lupus when she was young, and he passed away. Let's see. He was diagnosed in 1937 and he passed away in 1941. So she would have been around, let's see, in her teenage years when he passed away. And then she eventually was diagnosed with lupus, and that is what caused her death at such a young age. She was also accepted and part of the Iowa Writers Workshop, which is a really prestigious fine arts writing program at the University of Iowa. She was there, and there have been many famous writers who have gone to this school, but she was in company of many of them here that are listed here. I think Marilynne Robinson is another one. Her name might be a little bit more familiar than some of the other ones to you. So yeah, that's a little bit about her background. She lived with her mother and died at a young age, and she loved birds. The cover of her complete short stories is a peacock, and she kind of always loved birds. So that's an interesting fact about her. Okay, so let's take a look at the story itself. Um, I did give you a content warning. And let's open up the PDF. So I hope actually that you were able to listen to the story, listen to her reading this story while you had your eyes on the page reading for yourself. Okay, so let's get my notes out here. Okay, so Flannery O'Connor is a Christian or Catholic artist, really kind of thinking through what it means to be a Christian artist and what does it mean to make Christian art. Um, so the historical context of this. So we saw that she lived between the years 1925 and 1964. So her most prolific years of writing were going to be post World War II, right? In 1945, World War II ended, and she would have been around 20 years old at that time. So we have to place this in its historical context. This is also right on the cusp of, the civil rights movement. So the audience that she is writing to is not exactly us, right? Not exactly you or I. After World War II, the whole world really ends up in this nihilism. And let's take a quick look at that word and what it means. So nihilism, the doctrine that nothing actually exists or that existence or values are meaningless. So it's this idea that just kind of nothing matters, right? It's all just um, a very cynical, kind of depressed outlook on life. So after World War II, there had been two world wars within, the span of 40 years. World War I was in the early 1980s, 18-ish. And then we had World War II, 1939 to 1945. So there was a lot of cultural despair. Christianity became more about superficial values rather than a lot of people, I think a lot of people abandoned their faith at that time. People were compromising, denying a lot of the traditional church teachings. So for her, this was a kind of catalyst for the type of stories that she was going to write. Um, so in this nihilistic world as well, right, materialism is um, kind of the main way of thinking that only what we can see is what exists, only matter, only the things that you can experience through the senses are real, right? Things that you can see, hear, touch. And I think in many ways our society is in this state as well. That, the materialists, not meaning necessarily that materialism on one hand is, the desire for more things, but what I'm talking about is this materialist perspective that the only things that are real are the things that you can see and touch and feel and experience with your senses. Um, so, so for a lot of people, after these wars, the question was, okay, where is God? Where does he come in? Where does religion play into this? So this led to this incredible nihilism. There is no God. There is no right or wrong. There's no meaning. Um, And at this point, there was a rise of nihilistic and absurdist literature, which was essentially the writing of stories to intentionally tell you that there is no meaning to them, that everything is random, everything is disordered chaos, nothing has any meaning, etc. Um, you also have existentialism, very prevalent at this time, and the misfit in this story actually gives an existentialist speech. So he says, if Jesus isn't who he said he was, if he didn't raise the dead, then there's nothing left to do except take the pleasure where you find it. So Flannery O'Connor and some other Christian writers at this time start challenging this nihilistic worldview. This nihilistic worldview says, right, that there is no meaning, there is no mystery. It's all just, black and white. So Flannery O'Connor was trying to introduce mystery and grace to a world, sorry, that at this time had no room for it. Okay. So she feels that her audience needs to be kind of shaken out of this stupor that they are in. So as a result, her stories shake you up quite a bit, maybe even traumatize you to some extent. So her background, again, she grew up in Georgia, attended the Iowa's Writer Workshop, and really was most prolific during the time of her life when she was really sick and suffering. And, after seeing her father die from this disease, then she's diagnosed with this disease. I'm sure that she had this feeling of kind of impending death, right? That I'm going to end up like him. Okay. So often your first reaction to reading the story would be like, what? Like, this is crazy. I don't like this. What the heck just happened? Um, after I first read her stories, it was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even know what to think. I couldn't sleep for a while, right? My mind is racing, and it's almost like you're watching a horror movie. Okay, so all of Flannery O'Connor's stories follow essentially the same pattern and structure. So once you understand kind of what she's doing, then you'll be able to interpret all of her stories. One interesting thing is that she is really intentionally writing in the structure of a Greek tragedy, but with a twist. So Greek tragedies hinge on a reversal and a recognition. So if any of you are familiar with the story of Oedipus, um, there's the reversal would be like that it's going one way. So for Oedipus, he says he's going to track down the killer of his father. And then the plot twist is, oh, actually, you're the killer of your father. So the reversal. And then we also have the recognition. So again, this is Greek tragedy. So in Greek mythology, the story of the Odyssey, Odysseus is disguised as like a poor beggar, and then there's this recognition. Finally, they recognize him as the king. Okay, so what O'Connor does is um, that the recognition for her is not that some character is realizing that other people are not what they seem, right? Like, oh, that's actually not a beggar, that's our king. She has the main character realize that they are not what they seem. So, as far as Flannery O'Connor is concerned, pride is the biggest sin and the biggest obstacle to grace. So, if you read let's see, the essay entitled that was specifically focused on this story, A Good Man is Hard to Find by Douglas Leonard, he discusses this as well, the moment of grace. So she sets up these characters who feel pretty good about themselves. They have a pretty good, pretty high opinion of themselves, right? So the grandmother, she sets herself up as a very respectable person, well-mannered, right? Outward appearance is everything. She's very concerned about, what she's wearing the day that they get in the car in case they get in a car accident and, she's lying on the side of the road and she wants to make sure everybody will know she's a lady. So Flannery shows us this character at the beginning, and we kind of think like, okay, she seems all right. But and this character obviously has a very high opinion of themselves, right? They think that they are good. Um, but slowly throughout the story, we come to terms with the fact that, okay, actually, this is really not a very good person. And I think that the use of racial slurs in one particular instance um, is supposed to make us question the grandmother's moral, ethical values. I don't think that it was used for any other purpose than that. So the grandmother is faced with another character, then the misfit, who she despises and looks down on, right? We're introduced to the misfit right in the very beginning of the story. She's reading the newspaper and sees that this convict is on the loose. And so, obviously, this is a deplorable person. Um, oh, another thing. So, all of the grandmothers perceived good things about herself are superficial, right? All of her interactions with everybody, she speaks in cliches. It's very shallow. Um, she's not a very deep person, right? So at the end, the big reversal comes where it's really this surprise. Actually, you are a bad guy, right? You are the prideful one. You are the self-righteous one. So who are you to judge this other person? Okay. So the other thing that's going on in her stories is that they are structured around this moment of an epiphany, the moment of grace. So her stories are about the presentation of a moment of grace where her characters can either accept or reject the grace. So she doesn't think that grace looks like a precious moments figurine or, it comes all nice and beautiful wrapped up in a bow. For her, she's more coming at grace from like a fear and trembling, right? Like that if you're approached by an angel, you fall down in fear and trembling, and it's scary. It's a scary situation. So for Flannery, grace is not like some beautiful, wonderful thing in appearance. It is more of a something that might instill fear in you. She also thinks that sometimes God lets the devil do a whole lot of bad things in preparation for a moment of grace to come. So she says, violence precedes and comes after a moment of grace. So there's something that shakes you out of your pride and self-righteousness. There's a moment of grace, and then there's a violent afterward. And just because a character might accept the moment of grace doesn't mean that everything is going to be great and wonderful. They still will endure these trials and tribulations and often meet violent ends. So she's essentially writing to this godless world, this world that says that there's no meaning, that there's no mystery of life, right? There's no miracles, nothing of that sort, and is reminding them of, or trying to remind them of grace and mystery. So she writes a lot about death, suffering, facing death, and it's important to understand, right, that she was going through these things herself. She was suffering with her condition and, facing death. And she really believed that the moment of your death is a defining moment. It's your defining moment that's going to show you who you really are. And another quote from her, she said, "Violence is the extreme situation that best reveals what we are essentially." So her stories all built around this intense moment that makes or breaks you, which she believes is either you accept the grace or you accept damnation. Okay. So I think that should help you a little bit understand more of what is going on in this story. Um, so the whole first part of the story, right, we're getting set up with who she is, um, how she interacts with people, the sorts of things that she says. And then she's also manipulating her family and unintentionally manipulates them into this horrible situation, right? Into um the accident and right before the accident, right, she realizes that, oh, this isn't where I thought it was, right? She thinks that it's this place that she had been to before, and it's really not. She realizes that it's in another state altogether. And then we have the interaction with the misfit. Of course, she has to tell him that she recognizes him, right? So all of her actions now are just leading to all of their deaths. So that is, what she has to come to terms with and realize. And then she has this really interesting interaction with the misfit. And let's see. She keeps telling him that he's a good man. She also keeps telling him to pray, which is interesting because she's not actually praying, right? If she was a good Christian woman, as she purports herself to be, then she should be praying, right, for their situation. But she doesn't pray. She just tells him to pray. And then at the very end, let's see. At the very end, she has this moment of recognition, this moment of grace. And she says, "Why, you're one of my own babies." Or sorry, "Why, you're one of my babies. You're one of my own children." She reached out and touched him on the shoulder, right? So this is kind of that moment of grace for her, that she is shocked out of herself and she's been humbled and she's coming to this realization of what she's done. But then the misfit sprang back as if a snake had bitten him and shot her 3 times through the chest. So that is the violent end that she meets. In this other essay, the one by Douglas Leonard, he says, let's see. At the close of A Good Man is Hard to Find, the misfit remarks of the murdered grandmother that she would have been a good woman if somebody had been there to shoot her every minute of her life. The misfit took on the job for the grandmother, but it is the author who takes care of the reader. Anytime we begin to feel sympathy, she shoots us. So I thought that was an interesting insight, right? Just as we start to feel sorry for the grandmother, you know, we're shocked at what is happening in the story. So I think that there's a lot more here than maybe just meets the eye on first reading. So I'd encourage you to think about the things I've said, think about what it says in these essays, and do your best to answer the questions in the reading response based on those. All right. Okay, so that is pretty much it for today. Thanks for watching this video and sticking with me. Sorry we couldn't be there in person today. I think it would have been an interesting class, and I was planning for some discussions to help us work through those questions in the reading response, but that's okay. So next week we will dive into the novel Things Fall Apart, which is a really great book, and I hope you enjoy it. Yes, that's it. Read chapters 1 through 6. Please actively read. You don't need to submit anything for that, but I will be checking active reading at some point for this novel. And that's all you got to do. Just read the first 6 chapters of the book. Of course, you do have these other things due Friday, and I will see you all next week in class. Okay? Bye-bye.